From Darkness to Light, A Journey of Redemption. Part 1, The Last Good Day. In the warm summer of 1998, 7-year-old Nathan Reynolds sat across from his father in a Mexican-American restaurant, his small hands wrapped around a basket of nachos. The salsa was a bit too spicy for his young taste buds, but he didn't mind. His father, Marcus, was actually looking at him, actually talking to him, and that made everything taste better. "Here, try it with the cheese dip," Marcus said, pushing the bowl closer to his son. His father's smile was genuine that day, his eyes clear and present. Nathan remembered thinking how tall his father looked, how strong his hands seemed as they gestured while telling stories about his own childhood. On the drive home, when Nathan wore his seatbelt incorrectly, Marcus took the time to show him the proper way. "Safety first, son," he said, his voice carrying that particular mix of authority and affection that made Nathan feel both protected and proud. That was the last good day. Nathan would replay this memory countless times in the years that followed, trying to understand what changed, trying to pinpoint the moment his father transformed from protector to tormentor. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, turning off all the warmth and replacing it with something cold and unpredictable. The changes came gradually at first. Marcus stopped asking about Nathan's day. The family dinners became silent affairs, heavy with tension. Then came the first explosion over spilled milk at breakfast. Nathan had never seen such rage in his father's eyes before, never felt the sting of a belt against his skin. "This is for your own good," Marcus would say, his voice a terrible calm before each storm of violence. "You need to learn." What Nathan learned instead was fear. He learned to read the subtle shifts in his father's mood, the way his mother Elena's shoulders would tense when Marcus came home from work, the sound of heavy footsteps that meant trouble was coming. Their suburban home, with its neat lawn and trimmed hedges, became a battlefield where the enemy wore his father's face. The transformation extended beyond physical violence. Marcus began exercising control over every aspect of Nathan's life, what he could watch on TV, what clothes he could wear, what music he could listen to. One particularly painful incident involved a deck of Yu-Gi-Oh cards that Elena had bought for Nathan's 8th birthday. "This is devil worship," Marcus had declared, tearing the cards to pieces while Nathan watched, helpless and horrified. The destruction of those cards, more than any physical punishment, marked a turning point in Nathan's young life. It wasn't just the loss of something he loved. It was the realization that his father could and would destroy anything that brought him joy. But perhaps the most devastating revelation came when Nathan witnessed his father's cruelty extend to animals. Marcus would trap the neighborhood strays, treating their deaths as entertainment. Nathan, who had always found solace in caring for animals, felt something break inside him the first time he heard his father laugh while hurting a helpless creature. Elena tried to protect her son, but her interventions often led to worse consequences. She would slip him small gifts to replace what Marcus destroyed, whisper words of comfort when Marcus wasn't around, but she too lived under the shadow of Marcus's authority. "Your father loves you," she would say, though her eyes told a different story. "He just has a different way of showing it." But Nathan knew better. The man who had once shown him how to wear a seatbelt properly, who had shared stories over nachos and salsa, that man was gone. In his place was someone Nathan began to see as a twisted version of God himself, all-powerful, merciless, and impossible to escape. In the quiet of his room, young Nathan made a vow that would shape the next several years of his life. If he couldn't fight back against his father directly, he would become something his father had inadvertently created, a force of fear and control in his own right. The lessons of power and intimidation had been well taught, and Nathan proved to be an apt pupil. Part 2. The Path of Violence. Nathan's transformation from victim to aggressor began in the halls of Ridgeview Elementary School. At just 6 years old, he had already learned that power came from making others afraid, and he applied this lesson with frightening efficiency. The first incident occurred during recess on a bright autumn morning. A boy named Tommy had been playing in the sandbox, constructing an elaborate castle with plastic molds. Nathan approached him, his small face already set in the hard expression he'd learned from his father. "Move," Nathan commanded. When Tommy hesitated, Nathan didn't just push him aside. He body-slammed the smaller boy into the sand, watching with a detached fascination as Tommy's face contorted with pain and fear. "Please stop," Tommy had whimpered. "It really hurts." But the sound of pleading only fueled Nathan's actions. Each cry of pain was a twisted confirmation that he was no longer powerless, no longer the victim. He had become what his father had taught him to be, someone to be feared. The playground became his testing ground. He would corner girls, pulling their hair and pinching them until they cried. One particular incident involved the pastor's daughter, Sarah, during Sunday school. While the adults discussed scripture in the next room, Nathan systematically terrorized her, pulling her hair, punching her face, pinching her arms until they bruised. Her tears and eventual hatred of him felt like a perverse victory. His reputation grew quickly. Teachers began to watch him more closely, but Nathan had learned from his father how to appear normal when authority figures were watching. It was in the unguarded moments that he struck a quick punch to someone's stomach in the hallway, a threatening whisper during class changes, a calculated act of cruelty during recess. One of his most calculated acts of cruelty involved a girl named Emily, who had made the mistake of developing a crush on him in first grade. When she tried to give him a Valentine's card, Nathan didn't just reject it. He tore it to pieces in front of the entire class, looking directly into her eyes as he did so, just as his father had done with his Yu-Gi-Oh cards. "What are you going to do about it?" He would challenge anyone who dared to look at him wrong, his small voice carrying the same menacing tone he'd heard at home countless times. Not everyone gave up on him. Mrs. Anderson, his first-grade teacher, saw something beneath the violence. One day, she pulled him aside during art class, her kind eyes meeting his guarded ones. "You're a really nice boy, Nathan," she said softly. "I know you are." For a brief moment, something flickered in Nathan's eyes, a glimpse of the child he might have been under different circumstances. But then he remembered his father's lessons. Kindness was weakness, and weakness got you hurt. The next day, he deliberately disrupted her class worse than ever before, leading a group of boys in making such chaos that Mrs. Anderson's gentle voice finally cracked. "The next step is detention," she shouted, her disappointment evident. The parent-teacher conferences that followed were exercises in futility. His mother would cry, his father would rage, and Nathan would sit there, a small, defiant figure in a too-large chair. "Why are you doing this to us?" his mother would plead. His father's hypocritical lectures about not hitting girls only strengthened Nathan's resolve. How could he take seriously the words of a man who regularly abused his own wife? The violence escalated at home too. Nathan began to challenge his father's authority in small ways at first: a rolled eye, a muttered comment, a slammed door. He started threatening his siblings with kitchen knives, mimicking the way his father used fear as a control mechanism. The situation reached a breaking point one afternoon when Nathan attempted to drown his cousin in the family pool. The incident lasted only moments, but it marked a terrifying milestone in his descent into violence. As he watched his cousin gasping for air, something in him finally recoiled. He had become everything he hated about his father, and for the first time, that realization frightened him. But knowing you've gone too far and knowing how to stop are two very different things. Nathan was caught in a spiral of violence that seemed to have no end, fueled by rage he couldn't control and pain he couldn't express. His father had succeeded in creating a mirror image of himself, a young boy who understood power only through the lens of fear and control. The church, which should have been a sanctuary, became another battleground. Nathan rejected not only his father's authority, but also the God his father claimed to serve. In moments of private rebellion, he would raise his middle finger to the sky, cursing the deity he blamed for giving him such a father. Little did he know that this act of defiance would mark the beginning of a very different kind of spiritual journey, one that would eventually lead him out of the darkness his father had created. Part 3: Seeds of Change. The first crack in Nathan's armor of anger appeared in the most unlikely of places, a small Christian bookstore on the corner of Maple and Fifth. His mother, Elena, had taken him there one Saturday afternoon, perhaps hoping that something, anything, might reach her troubled son. While Elena browsed through devotional books, Nathan found himself drawn to a rack of comic books. They weren't the usual superhero stories he was used to, these were different. He picked up one titled The Consequences of Choice, more out of boredom than interest. His mother, seeing his rare moment of engagement, quietly purchased it along with several others. That night, alone in his room, Nathan began to read. The story followed a businessman named Michael who lived a life remarkably similar to his father's, full of anger, abuse, and self-righteousness. One scene particularly caught Nathan's attention. Michael's wife had made him a simple peanut butter sandwich, only to have it thrown back in her face with cruel words. Nathan's hands tightened on the pages as he recognized his father's behaviors in this character. The story took a dramatic turn when Michael fell from a building and experienced a vision of judgment. The detailed illustrations showed the man standing naked before God's throne, while an angel held the book of life. Nathan's heart began to race as he read the angel's words, "His name does not appear." The final pages showed two parallel lives, the path of destruction Michael had chosen and the path of righteousness he could have taken. For the first time, Nathan saw clearly how choices created consequences, how one path led to darkness and another to light. That night he had the first of many nightmares. In his dream, shadowy arms burst from the ground, dragging him down into suffocating darkness. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The terror felt real, tangible, different from his usual nightmares about his father. The dreams continued, each more vivid than the last. In one particularly haunting vision, he encountered what he believed to be the Antichrist, a figure wearing a business suit, reminiscent of one of his trading cards. When he tried to banish the entity by invoking Jesus' name, as he'd seen others do, nothing happened. The being simply smiled, a terrible knowing smile, before transforming into a horrific beast. During this period, Nathan began to feel something he'd never experienced before, a presence watching him. Not like his father's threatening surveillance, but something both more powerful and more gentle. After particularly violent outbursts, he would feel this presence more strongly, along with an unfamiliar sensation: guilt. One Sunday evening, after another mandatory church service, the feeling became overwhelming. Standing in his backyard, looking up at the stars, Nathan suddenly felt certain that divine judgment was imminent. For the first time in years, real fear, not anger, gripped his heart. "No, don't do it. Have mercy on me," he cried out, his voice trembling. Later that night, he confessed to his parents, "Something's missing from my life." His mother held him close, tears in her eyes, but even she couldn't fill the growing void he felt inside. Yet still Nathan resisted. He had built his walls too high, fortified them too well with anger and pride. When his parents finally separated and he went to live with his mother at age 11, he thought he was finally free, not just from his father, but from God as well. But freedom felt hollow. Without his father to rebel against, Nathan found himself adrift, his anger now purposeless. The violence that had defined him began to feel more like a prison than a protection. In quiet moments, when he thought about the people he'd hurt, Tommy in the sandbox, Sarah at Sunday school, his cousin in the pool, something that felt suspiciously like remorse would creep into his consciousness. Then came the voice, soft but unmistakable, calling his name one ordinary afternoon. Nathan froze in his tracks, his heart pounding. "Who is it?" he demanded, trying to sound tough despite his fear. The response was gentle but clear. "I am the Lord your God. Search for me tonight." It wasn't a command filled with his father's rage or a threat backed by violence. It was an invitation, the first real choice Nathan had been offered in years. Part 4: Spiritual Awakening. That night marked the beginning of Nathan's transformation. Following the mysterious voice's directive, he found himself drawn to research he'd previously avoided. Instead of dismissing religious materials as his father's tools of control, he began to explore them with new eyes, seeking understanding rather than ammunition for rebellion. The turning point came when he discovered a DVD of The Passion of the Christ in his mother's collection. Alone in the living room, Nathan started watching what he expected to be just another religious film. Instead, he encountered something that would shatter his carefully constructed walls. As the story unfolded on screen, Nathan found himself increasingly unable to maintain his emotional distance. The portrayal of Jesus' suffering struck him differently than any church sermon ever had. This wasn't the sanitized version his father had used to justify punishment. This was raw, real, and devastatingly personal. The scene that broke him showed Jesus on the cross, alongside two thieves. Nathan felt a sudden, overwhelming connection to the thief who spoke. "Don't you fear God, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." In that moment, faces began flashing through Nathan's mind. Tommy in the sandbox, crying in pain. Sarah at Sunday school, her eyes full of hurt and betrayal. His cousin gasping for air in the pool. His mother trying to hide her tears. Countless others he had terrorized and abused. The weight of his actions crashed over him like a wave. Then came Jesus' response to the thief. "Truly I tell you, you will be with me in paradise." The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He had lived by his father's code, violence for violence, pain for pain, but here was something entirely different. Mercy for cruelty, love for hatred. Tears began streaming down his face, tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed since early childhood. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, years of buried pain and guilt finally breaking through. He ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and collapsed onto the cold tile floor. There in that small space, Nathan Reynolds, the boy who had learned to be feared, who had built his identity on causing pain, finally broke down completely. His prayer wasn't eloquent or rehearsed like the ones he'd heard in church. It was raw and desperate. "Jesus," he choked out between sobs, "I know I have sinned against you. I've hurt so many people. I ask for you to forgive me and come into my heart and save me." What happened next defied rational explanation. Nathan felt as if invisible hands were lifting a massive weight from his shoulders. The burden of anger, fear, and pain that he'd carried for so long suddenly lifted. In its place came something he had never truly experienced before: peace. The sensation was so overwhelming that he remained on the bathroom floor for what felt like hours, experiencing what he would later describe as being completely changed from the inside out. The hardened shell he had built around himself cracked and fell away, revealing the person he was always meant to be. When he finally emerged from the bathroom, Elena noticed immediately that something was different about her son. The perpetual anger in his eyes had been replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. When she asked if he was okay, Nathan hugged her, something he hadn't done voluntarily in years. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I met Jesus. The real Jesus, not Dad's version." It was the beginning of a new chapter, but Nathan knew that true transformation would require more than just a moment of revelation. He would need to learn how to live out this new reality, how to replace violence with compassion, how to break the cycle his father had started. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in his young life, Nathan felt equipped to face it. He had found something stronger than his father's rage, more powerful than his own anger: the transformative power of divine love. Part 5: Redemption. The changes in Nathan's life following his spiritual encounter weren't instant magic. They were more like a slow-blooming flower, gradually opening to reveal something beautiful where thorns had once been. The process of transformation proved to be both challenging and profound, testing his newfound faith against deeply ingrained habits. The first test came just days after his conversion. In the school cafeteria, a student accidentally knocked into him, spilling milk across his new shoes. The old Nathan would have responded with immediate violence. Instead, he felt an internal struggle, the familiar surge of anger wrestling with something new. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he helped the student clean up the mess. "It's okay," he heard himself say, "accidents happen." The look of shock on his classmates' faces made him realize just how much his previous behavior had affected others. People had grown to expect violence from him, and now he had the daily challenge of proving he was no longer that person. Nathan began the difficult process of making amends. He started with Sarah, the pastor's daughter he had tormented years ago. After a Sunday service, he approached her family with trembling hands but determined spirit. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice catching. "What I did to you was wrong. I know saying sorry doesn't fix it, but I want you to know that I'm different now, and I deeply regret hurting you." While not everyone was immediately ready to accept his apologies or believe in his transformation, Nathan remained steadfast in his new path. He sought out those he had hurt, one by one, acknowledging his wrongs and asking for forgiveness. Some encounters were harder than others, particularly with Tommy, whom he had bullied so severely in elementary school. At home, the change was even more dramatic. Elena watched in amazement as her son, who had once been consumed by rage, began showing signs of genuine compassion. He started helping around the house without being asked, speaking kindly to his siblings, and even praying for his father, something that surprised everyone, including himself. The most significant test of his transformation came when he had to face his father again. During a required visitation, Marcus attempted to provoke his son with the same controlling behavior that had once inspired such hatred. But Nathan responded differently now. "Dad," he said calmly, looking his father in the eyes, "I forgive you, and I'm praying for you." The words hung in the air between them, powerful in their simplicity. Marcus, for the first time, seemed at a loss for words. Nathan's new life wasn't without struggles. There were moments when the old anger would surface, times when he felt tempted to resort to his previous ways. But now he had something he hadn't had before: a source of strength beyond himself. In those moments, he would remember the feeling in the bathroom that night, the lifting of his burden, the touch of divine love. He began to channel his energy into helping others, particularly younger students who reminded him of himself. He started a peer counseling group at school, focusing on students dealing with anger and family issues. His personal testimony became a powerful tool for reaching others who were trapped in cycles of violence. "There's a different way," he would tell them. "You don't have to be defined by what's been done to you or what you've done to others." The transformation extended to every aspect of his life. Where he had once used his strength to intimidate, he now used it to protect the vulnerable. The same determination that had made him a feared bully now made him a fierce advocate for those who couldn't defend themselves. In a particularly poignant moment, Nathan found himself intervening when he witnessed a boy bullying a smaller student. The situation mirrored his own past actions so closely that it felt like watching a replay of his former life. But this time, he was on the other side. "I know what you're feeling," he told the young bully after separating the boys. "I know why you think this makes you strong, but let me tell you about real strength." Epilogue: Breaking the Cycle. 10 years after that transformative night in the bathroom, Nathan Reynolds stood before a group of troubled teenagers at a youth rehabilitation center. The scars of his past had become stepping stones to his purpose, and his story had become a beacon of hope for others trapped in cycles of violence and abuse. "I used to think power meant making others fear you," he told the group, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Now I know that real power is being strong enough to show love in the face of hate, to choose mercy when you could choose revenge." The center had become a regular part of his life. Every weekend, he would share his testimony, counsel young people, and demonstrate through his actions that change was possible. Many of the teens he worked with came from backgrounds similar to his own: broken homes, abusive parents, anger issues. In their faces, he often saw reflections of his younger self. His relationship with his father had evolved in unexpected ways. While they never became close in the conventional sense, Nathan's consistent display of forgiveness and grace gradually created small cracks in Marcus's hardened exterior. During one visit, his father actually asked, "How did you do it? How did you change?" "It wasn't me, Dad," Nathan replied. "It was Jesus, the real Jesus, not the one we used as a weapon." His mother, Elena, had witnessed the full arc of his transformation. She now worked alongside him in various youth outreach programs, her own healing journey intertwined with his. Together, they had created a support group for families dealing with domestic violence, turning their painful past into a source of hope for others. The nightmares that had once plagued him were replaced by dreams of purpose and possibility. The comic book that had first sparked his spiritual journey sat framed in his office, a reminder of how God could use the smallest things to initiate the greatest changes. Perhaps the most powerful testament to Nathan's transformation came from those he had hurt in the past. Sarah, the pastor's daughter, now brought her own children to hear him speak at youth events. Tommy, whom he had bullied in elementary school, had become one of his closest friends and supporters in his ministry work. "The cycle of violence ends with me" became Nathan's personal motto. He understood that true redemption wasn't just about personal change. It was about creating ripples of transformation that could touch countless other lives. In his private moments, Nathan would sometimes reflect on that terrified, angry little boy who had once cursed God from his bedroom window. He would think about the long journey from darkness to light, from hatred to love, from fear to faith. The scars remained, but they had been transformed into something beautiful: proof that even the deepest wounds could become sources of healing for others. God doesn't waste our pain, he would often say to those struggling with their own dark pasts. He transforms it into purpose if we let him. As he stood before those troubled teens, Nathan saw in their eyes the same hunger for change that he had once felt. He knew that his story wasn't just about personal redemption. It was about the possibility of transformation for anyone willing to take that first step toward change. Your past doesn't have to define your future, he would tell them, his voice filled with the conviction of someone who had lived these words. In Christ, you can become something entirely new. I'm living proof of that. And in those moments, standing before young lives teetering on the edge of choice, Nathan Reynolds, once a victim, once an abuser, now a testament to grace, understood that his journey had come full circle. The darkness that had once threatened to consume him had become the very thing God used to light the way for others. This was true redemption, not just being saved from something, but being saved for something. It was about breaking cycles, healing wounds, and showing others that no matter how dark their story might be, light could always break through.